Good evening, class. Good evening, Caliph. Thank you. Good evening, Mary, and good evening, Kitawe. So we stopped at movement along the supply curve, what we call movement. Movement. We call it the movement along the supply curve. Movement along the supply curve. Supply curve, stroke what we call changes. We call it changes in what they call in quantity supplied. So changes in what they call quantity supplied. So movement along the supply curve, so what they call changes in what they call quantity supplied. So the changes in quantity supplied. So the other name of movement along the supply curve is changes in quantity supplied. So number one, at the back of your mind, I want you to remember that when you talk about movement along the supply curve, is caused by changes in price only. It basically implies that other factors are held constant, but what causes the movement along the supply curve, so stock changes in quantity supplied, is what you call price of the commodity. So we can have the diagram, then we illustrate. So on this diagram, on the y-axis, we have the price. We have the price. This is the supply curve. On the y-axis is quantity. On the y-axis is definitely quantity. So we can have price P1, and then we have P1, this is Q1, then P2, then this should be what we call Q2. That should be Q2. So we can have this when price increases, and when price decreases, we're not by that. So quantity increasing, this, then when you have quantity reducing, that. So then when you proceed, we have a point. We have point X, Y. When it's moving, so look up to. So the movement along X, Y, and Y, X is what you call the movement along X, Y, and Y, X is what you call movement along the supply curve. Together, the movement along X, Y, and Y, X is what you call the movement along the supply curve. Together is what you call the movement along the supply curve. We respond with a yes if we are together. We respond with a yes if we are together. We respond with a yes if we are together. So perfect if we are together. Thank you. Aye. So we can denote this and talk about it when we say at low price P1, we can say at, we just give it here, at low, we say at low price P1, the quantity, we can know the quantity supplied is low at Q1. So at price 1, the quantity supplied is very low at Q1. Are you able to see that? The quantity supplied is low at Q1. And you say when the price is increased, say when what we call the price is increased, we say from P1 to P2. So when the price is basically increased from P1 to P2, what happens? When the price is increased from P1 to P2, what happens? We see that the quantity supplied is now going to increase from Q1 to Q2. To say that the quantity supplied, we say will increase, we say from what we call Q1 to Q2. So the quantity supplied definitely will increase from Q1 to Q2. While that is happening, are you able to see? When you increase it, what is going to happen along the supply curve? We have it moving from X to Y. Are you able to see? While that is happening, we have a movement from X to Y when you increase the price. Are we able to see that? Are we able to see that? So we say this causes what we call a movement. We say along what we call the supply curve. Along the supply curve, causes the movement along the supply curve. We say from X to Y. That definitely causes a movement along the supply curve from X to Y. Causes a movement along the supply curve from X to Y. Then we can come here and say, on the other hand, so on the other hand, at P2, we say that the quantity supplied, we say is high at Q2. Are we able to see that? On the other hand, when you're at price P2, you can see that the quantity supplied is very high at Q2. Are we able to see that? The quantity supplied is very high at Q2. Are we able to see that? Perfect. Abdi Nasir is very high at Q2. Then you say when the price is decreased, when the price is decreased, we say from P2 to P1. So when this price is basically decreased, look up from P2 to P1. What happened, Kitao? When the price is decreased from P2 to P1, what happens? When that price is basically decreased from P2 to P1, what happens? When the price is decreased from P2 to P1, what happens? So what happens? The quantity supplied is going to be reduced. So when the price is increased from P2 to P1, we say quantity supplied, what we call the quantity supplied, we say reduces. We say from Q2 to Q1. So the quantity supplied basically reduces from Q2 to Q1. And what does it cause along the supply curve? What does this basically cause along the supply curve? What does it basically cause along the supply curve? We know that for sure, there's a movement along the supply curve now from Y to X. So say this causes a movement. This causes what you call it, a movement along what you call the supply curve. Along the supply curve, causes the movement along the supply curve from, we call it from Y to X. That definitely causes a movement along the supply curve from Y to X. Together from Y to X. Causes a movement along the supply curve from Y to X. Causes a movement along the supply curve from Y to X. Causes a movement along the supply curve from definitely Y to X. From Y to X. Are we able to see that? From Y to X. But at the back of our mind, I did give you something that whenever we talk about movement or changes in quantity supplied, it is basically caused by changes in price only. Other factors are held constant. So I put an NB and say, movement along the supply curve, movement along what we call the supply curve, movement along the supply curve, what we call the movement along the supply curve, is brought about, we call it by changes by changes in price only are the factors held constant. Is brought about by changes in price, other factors held constant. In economics, what did you say about other factors being held constant? The name is what called ceteris paribus. In economics, we say that ceteris paribus. When you want to say that other factors held constant, we simply say ceteris paribus. Together. Is that understood? If that is understood, we respond with a yes. Perfect. So then we proceed to the next, that is what we call shift in supply, stroke changes in supply. We move to what we call shift in supply, what we call the shift in supply, what we call shift in supply, shift in supply, what we call shift, we call it shift in supply. So what we call changes, we call it the changes in what we call supply, the changes in supply. So the shift in supply is to what we call the changes in supply, shift in supply, so what we call the changes in supply. At the back of our mind, I want us to remember that whenever we talk about shift in supply, it is brought by other factors other than price. So at the back of your mind, you need to understand that whenever we talk about shift, it is brought by other factors other than price. So together, it is brought by other factors that affect supply other than price. So what are these factors that affect, what are these factors that basically affect supply other than price? What are those factors? What are those factors other than price? What are those factors other than price? Climate, climate. We have the cost of production. We have technology. We have transport and communication. We have issues to do with incidents of strike. But we put a diagram just to denote what you're saying when you talk about shift. So this is what denotes basically shift. So this is the y-axis. This is price. This is quantity. This is quantity. So this is the normal supply. So we have this. We have this. We have that. So this is S1. We can call it S1. This is SO, SO. This is S2, S2. Together, team. So on this, we remember that price is basically constant. Sorry, this is price is constant. If it's price, price is constant. But price does not cause changes in this. So we can put one of the factors called climate. We call it climate. Together, we call that factor climate. We respond with a yes if we are together. If we are together, we respond with a yes. So we call that factor climate. And I want you to enjoy. I want you to seriously enjoy economics. So when I look at this, I'll get this is quantity. This is quantity. So I want us to denote a number of things. So that this is the equilibrium quantity. So this will be QO. We'll give it as QO. This is Q2. This is Q1. Together. Are we together? Together. Together. Perfect. So when you look at this, we know that SO, when you have SO to S2, S2, this is the rightward. Rightward shift. We call it the rightward shift in supply curve. We call it the rightward shift in the supply curve. We call it the rightward shift in the supply curve. We call it the rightward shift in supply curve. So the downward shift in supply curve is also known as the downward shift. So when you see the word downward shift in what we call in supply curve. Downward shift in what we call the supply curve, the downward shift in what you call the supply curve, the downward shift in what you call the supply curve together. On the other hand, when you talk about SO, so this is when you have SO to S1, S1. So when you talk about SO to S1, S1, we call this one the leftward shift. We call it the leftward shift in what we call in supply curve. The leftward shift in supply curve. So the other name in an examination, if 𝐷𝐸, Mary and Kitawa gets it, the other name is upward shift in supply curve. We also call it the upward shift in supply curve. We call it the upward shift in supply curve. Denoted, noted upward shift in supply curve. So we talked about factor. We say that under this scenario, the price is basically remaining constant, and the shift in supply is basically caused by other factors other than the price. It is definitely caused by other factors other than the price. So on this, we talked about climate. So we say that if climate, we know that becomes favorable. If the climate basically becomes favorable, quantity supplied, the climate becomes favorable, quantity supplied increases. We know that from QO to Q2. So if the climate basically becomes favorable, we know that the quantity supplied will basically increase from QO to Q2. From QO to Q2. This causes, we understand this causes a shift to the right of what we call of the supply curve. This definitely causes a shift to the right of what we call of the supply curve. That will cause what we call a shift to the right of what we call of the supply curve. That will definitely cause what we call a shift to the right of what we call of the supply curve. That will cause what we call a shift to the right of the supply curve. We know that from SO to S2. So the other name, we know that rightward, other name is downward shift of supply curve. The other name is what we call the downward shift of supply curve. That is the other name. The other name is downward shift of supply curve. We call it the downward shift of the supply curve. I hope everybody is at home. So factors that causes the rightward shift of supply curve. What are these factors that will cause a rightward shift of supply curve? At the back of your mind, understand that whenever we have a rightward shift of the supply curve, it basically results into an increase in quantity supplied. So we can talk about factors. We'll talk about factors that causes what you call a rightward shift of supply curve. Rightward shift of supply curve. What are these factors that will cause the supply curve basically to shift to the right? Factors that will cause a rightward shift of supply curve. One of which we understand is what's called favorable. We call it the favorable climate. We call it the favorable climate as one of the first factors, favorable climate. Then we talk about better technology. When you have a good technology, better technology as another factor. Then you can talk about reduction in the cost of production, reduction in what we call in the cost of what we call production, reduction in the cost of production as another factor. Then we can talk about favorable government policy, favorable, we call it government policy, policies, and we have it e.g., we have it as reduction in taxes. We have it a favorable policy. One of it is the reduction in taxes. Favorable government policy, for example, reduction in taxes. Then you have also good transport and communication. When you have what we call a good transport and communication, that definitely leads to what we call a rightward shift, which results in increase in quantity supplied. Then we can also talk about reduction in incidence of strike, what we call reduction in what we call in the incidence. So what we call the incidence of strike, reduction in the incidence of strike. When there's a reduction in what we call incidence of strike, that basically leads to an increase in quantity supplied. We can also talk about what we call time in the long run. When you talk about time, we understand time that should be the long run. We have time in the long run. In the long run, that should be okay. Together, team, that is the rightward shift. That is from SO to S2. We respond to the yes if you're together. So we can also talk about expectation of a reduction in price. Again, expectation, we can talk about expectation of what you call reduction. Expectation of a reduction in price. Together, team, we respond to the yes. Are we together? If you're together, we respond to the yes. Perfect, Mary. So then we talk about, on the other hand, so we talked about if climate, on the other hand, if climate is unfavorable, on the other hand, if what we call the climate, because if the climate, we say, is unfavorable, if the climate is basically unfavorable, what is supplied? Quantity supplied, we know that will reduce. Quantity supplied definitely will reduce from QO, we have it to Q1. So on the other hand, if you have the climate being unfavorable, we understand that the quantity supplied will definitely decrease from QO to Q1. The quantity supplied, we know for sure, will definitely decrease from QO to Q1. From QO to Q1, this causes shift in supply curve. This causes what we call a shift in the supply curve. A shift in the supply curve? Supply curve to the left, and we call it upward shifting of supply curve. The other name is upward shifting of supply curve. We call it the upward shifting of supply curve. And we know that denoted by SO to S1. So denoted by SO to S1. Denoted by SO to S1. So I want to talk about causes what we call causes of the leftward shifting of what we call of the supply curve. Factors that causes of the leftward shifting. One we've already been given, we call it unfavorable. We call it unfavorable climate. We call it the unfavorable climate. Number one, then you can talk about obsolete or poor. Poor stroke what you call obsolete technology. When you have a bad technology, it results into reduction in quantity. So then we have the next what we call increase. We call it the increase in the cost of production. Increase in what we call the cost of production. Increase in what we call the cost of production. Then you have what we call unfavorable government policies. For example, i.e., we have it as increase in what we call the taxes. Unfavorable government policy. For example, we have, whenever we have instances of increase in taxes, increase in the taxes, then you have what you call, we can talk about poor transport and communication. What you have as poor transport and communication. For transport and communication, what you call poor transport and communication. What you call the poor transport and communication. Then you have increase in the incidence of strike. What you call as increase in the incidence of what you call strike. Increase in what you call incidence of strike. Then you have expectation of an increase in price. Expectation of what you call of an increase in price. So these are factors that will lead to a shift to the left or an upward shifting of the supply curve. Tuko pamoja. If you're together, then you give me a yes. If we are together, then you give me a yes. Perfect. So I want us to go to what we call interrelated. But before we go to interrelated, I say the point, that whenever we talk about shift, it is caused by other factors other than price. So shift in supply are brought about as an NB at the back of your mind, NB. Shift in supply, we know that are brought about. We know that by other factors, by what we call other factors other than are brought about by other factors other than influencing price, influencing supply, influencing supply. We know that other than the price. So other factors influencing price, influencing supply other than price. Other factors that influence supply other than the price. It is caused by other factors that we know that influences supply other than the price. Together, team. We should enjoy what you're doing. So then I want us to proceed. On now what we call interrelated supply. I want us to proceed on what we call interrelated supply. What we call the interrelated supply. Interrelated supply. I want us to go on what we call interrelated supply. Interrelated supply. Call it the interrelated interrelated supply. We call it the interrelated supply. We call it the interrelated supply. So basically on the interrelated supply, we have a number. We have a joint supply, we have a composite supply, and then we have competitive supply. So then we start with the first one. We call it a joint supply. So Kitawe, when you say a joint supply, what do you basically mean by joint supply? As one of the first interrelated supply. So some goods, we know that some goods are produced together. So when you look at some goods are basically produced together. And so we always say that the total supply for such goods is called a joint supply. Some goods are normally produced together. Some goods we know that are normally produced together. Some goods definitely are normally produced together. And say the total supply for such goods, the total supply for such goods, the total supply for such goods is known as what we call the joint. The total supply for such goods is known as what we call a joint supply. The total supply for such goods is known as what we call a joint supply. The certain goods are basically produced together, and so we understand that the total supply for such goods is basically known as a joint supply. A given example pertaining to joint supply, we can talk about crude oil. Example, crude oil, e.g., crude oil, we know that different oil products, we know that are produced. Different oil products are basically produced. Different oil products, we understand now, are basically produced together. Then the second, we have what's called a composite. We have it as a composite supply. So what is a composite supply? Composite supply. So some goods are what you call substitute of each other. So some goods are substitute of each other. When you talk about coffee and tea, those are substitute of each other. So I'm basically saying for such goods that the total quantity produced is called composite supply. So we know that for some goods are, we understand that some goods are substitute of each other, a substitute of each other. Some goods are definitely substitute of each other. Some goods are substitute of each other. Some goods are substitute of each other. The total quantity supply, we know that the total quantity supplied, we understand that the total quantity supplied, the total quantity supplied is called the quantity produced, supplied, or produced. We say is called what they call a composite. It's called a composite. We know that it's basically called a composite supply. It's definitely called a composite supply together. That is called a composite supply. It is called a composite supply. Then you have the last one on interrelated. We call it competitive supply. We call it competitive supply. So what is a competitive supply? When you say competitive supply, what do you mean by the word competitive supply? So when you talk about competitive supplying, this refers to the different uses to which a factor of production can basically be put into. This refers to the different users, refers to the different users, refers to the different, we call it to the different users, to which, we call it to which a factor, to which a factor of production refers to the different uses to which a factor of production can be put into, can be put into, can be put into the different uses to which a factor of production can be put into. That is what we call a competitive supply. And we all understand the factors of production: labor, land, capital, entrepreneurship. That is what we call a competitive together. If you're together, you give me yes. Then I want to move to what we call exceptions to the law of supply. What we call exceptions. Exceptions to what we call to the law of supply. Exceptions to the law of supply. What we call exceptions to the law of supply. So when you talk about exceptions to the law of supply contrary, so we can also call it regressive. We can also have it as what we call regressive supply. We can also have it as what we call the regressive supply together. We can have it as what we call regressive supply. We can have it as what we call regressive supply. So whenever we say exceptions to the law of supply, this class will be 100. That's what we say. Others are, I know, but make sure you don't miss class. I will also talk to those who have missed around 6 people, not to miss class. It's not good to miss class. So then we also say that, when you talk about exceptions, exceptions basically mean contrary to the law of supply. We know that on the law of supply, when other factors are held constant, when the price increases, the quantity supplied increases, and vice versa. And when I say vice versa, it means that when the price is low, the quantity supplied is low. So when you talk about exceptions, we're saying when the price increases, supply is low. And when the price is low, supply is high. That is what we call exception. So we say this goes against, this goes against what we call the law of what we call supply. This goes against the law of supply. This goes against the law of supply, i.e., quantity supplied, we say that the quantity supplied is high at low price, is high. We know that at low price. The quantity supplied is high at low price, and low, we know, at high price. So this is the exceptions. So where in life do we have exceptions to the law of supply? In what particular areas do we have exceptions to the law of supply? On what particular areas do we have exceptions to the law of supply? On what particular areas do you have exceptions to the law of supply? What areas do we have exceptions? In what particular areas do you have? Where do we apply? So we can talk about exceptions to the law of supply, exceptions to the law of supply. We know applies, we say in the following circumstances. So exceptions to the law of supply basically applies in what's called in the following circumstances. Together, exceptions to the law of supply basically applies in the following circumstances together. So we put down those circumstances. The first one, we call it, the first one we basically call it, the first one we call it, the first one we call it, the first one we call it, the first scenario we basically call it, we call it backward bending. We call it the backward. The first one we call it the backward bending. We call it the backward bending supply curve of labor. Supply curve of what we call of labor. The backward bending of the supply curve of labor. The backward bending of the supply curve of labor. So we call it stock regressive supply, stock regressive supply, stock what we call trade-off. We call it the trade-off between. We call it the trade-off between. We call it the trade-off between work and leisure. We call it the trade-off between work and what we call leisure. The trade-off between work and leisure. The trade-off between work and leisure. We call it the trade-off between work and leisure together. The trade-off between work and leisure. The trade-off between work and leisure. The trade-off between work and leisure. So the trade-off, I want to come up with a diagram. I want to basically come up with the diagram. So this is, so we call it the SL, supply curve of labor. SL, this supply curve of labor. Wait a minute as we do this, wait a minute. So we have, on this is wages, call it wages. Wages, I want you to begin, wait a minute. Then this is H, number of hours of work. Number of hours of work. We give it as a H. Number of hours of work, we call it H. So this is H1, H1. We have H2, this was H. Just a minute, I need to run this and put something very interesting. Just a minute, we draw it. So we can have it. So this should be H1. So at wage 1, W1, this is wage 1, H hours are offered for work. When you increase the wage to wage 2, H2 hours are being offered for work. When you move your wage to wage 3, we can see that 83 hours, number of hours of work, we have 83 hours offered for work. And lastly, we have H4. So we increase the wage to wage 4. We have H4 hours being offered for work. So what is the irony in this? What is the irony in this? What is the contradiction in this diagram? Who is able to see that contradiction? So we have the SL, supply. So we call it supply. Number, we call it represents supply of labor. So SL is supply of labor. Supply of labor. Then H is number of hours for work. Number of hours, we call it for work. Number of hours that are basically offered for work. Then we know that W, this is wages. W should be wages. W should what you call wages. W should definitely be what you call wages. What is the contradiction in this diagram? A good student. What happens when you give somebody more money? Kitawe. If today I tell you, if you're going to work for 2 hours, I am going to give you 2,000. However, if I increase the wages, to 4,000, you'll be willing to work for more hours. Is that true? Kitawe, is that true? If today we know that if you increase the hours, you're willing to work and work. A wise person is willing to work as long as the benefit is good, you're able to see the benefit. So the higher the wage, realistically, the more the hours one is willing to work. That is for sure true. Abdina said, that is for sure true. However, when you start at wage 1, we have H1 hours. When you move to wage 2, we have H2. Going on very well. When you move to wage 3, we have H3. However, the contradiction comes at 4. When you increase the wage to wage 4, look at the number of hours offered for work. Less. Is that true? And that is where the contradiction comes. That is what we call exceptions to the law of supply. Because we expect that the more money we give, the more hours we expect you to work. But here comes 4. Now the number of hours offered for work becomes less. And that is where the contradiction basically comes from. Are you seeing that, Abdi Nasir? That is where the contradiction basically comes from. Are we seeing that? Perfect. So the question at the back of every economist in this class is that why would we have such a scenario? Why would we have such a scenario? Khalif, why would you have such a scenario? Why would we have such a scenario? Why would you have that scenario? Why would you have such a scenario? Why would we have such a scenario? So number one, the first scenario would be some people, when they get money to a certain level, when they work and make money to a certain level, they'll tell you they want to go to Mombasa and take a rest. Is that true? Abdi Nasir. So the first reason that explains the exception that we have is some people, when they work longer and they make certain money, they will trade off work for leisure. So even if you're telling them that I'm increasing the wage, they will not work more than they have work. So the first reason is that some people substitute what they call work with leisure. Together, Khalif. Perfect. That is the first reason. The second reason is that people work with target. There are certain people who work with the target, which is a good thing, that you don't stay somewhere for long. Some people work with the target. From the day one, when they step into an employment door, they say that I am basically here for 5 years or 10 years, and my goal is to make, let's say, 5 million, 7 million, or 10 million. By the time I make this money, I will simply go and do my private practice altogether. So when these people get to that level, even if you tell them we're giving you triple the money, they will not work because they were simply working with the target altogether. After accumulating that money, they'll decide to go back and do their own thing. Their own thing means they create their own job. And the third reason that basically explains this at the backward bending of the supply curve of labor is that what we call the fear of taxes. Are we together? The third is what we call the fear of the taxes. The third one is what we call the fear of taxes. Remember, the more you earn, then the more that you are always subjected to taxes. But the more that you're earning, the more that you'll be subjected to taxation. So some people, when they get to tax bracket, we know that when you get to 24,000, some people don't want, because he knows that he is going to be told to file, or more taxes are going to come. So when some people get to 24,000, they don't want, unless it's something that is not going to pass through the government. So the higher the income, you understand that the higher the taxes. So some people, due to the fear of taxes, they're not willing to offer more hours for work, despite a wage increase. Is that explained? Is that at home? If that is at home, then we give a yes. Perfect, Abdi Nasir. So we put it down. So we say that at low wage, W1, comma, the hours offered for work, we say is H1. So we can see it at a low wage W1, the number of hours offered for work is H1. Then you say an increase, what you call an increase in wage to what you call W2, an increase to the wage to W2, an increase of wage to W2 leads to an increase, leads to what you call an increase, leads to an increase in what you call in the number of hours offered for work to H2. Increase the number of offered for work basically to H2 leads to an increase in number of offered to work to H2. So then you can say a further, we can call it a further increase to wage 3, a further increase to wage 3, which is W3, a further increase to W3, which is wage 3, a further increase to W3 leads to higher number, leads to what you call higher, leads to higher number of hours, higher number of hours. H3 leads to increase in higher number of hours, H3 being offered for work. What you call being offered for work. Being offered for work. Higher number of work being offered for work. Being offered for work. However, the contradiction comes here. However, we understand that however, an increase in wage, an increase in wage beyond what you call beyond a certain level. However, an increase in wage beyond a certain level, e.g., we have wage 3 to wage 4. For example, wage 3 to wage 4, beyond a certain level, wage 3 to wage 4, leads to fewer hours, leads to fewer, what you call fewer hours, leads to fewer hours, 𝐄4, 𝐄4, 𝐄4 being offered for work leads to fewer hours, 𝐄4 being offered for work. Let me just tilt the camera so that you can see it properly. Fewer hours being offered for work. 𝐄4 being offered for work. Fewer hours, 𝐄4 basically being offered for work. Being offered for work. So then I want to talk about reasons. We talk about reasons why increase in wage beyond certain level. Reasons why increase in wages beyond, we call it beyond a certain level. Increase in wage beyond a certain level, we say leads to. Reasons why increase in wage beyond a certain level leads to decrease in number of hours, leads to decrease, what they call decrease. Decrease, we call it numbers, a number of hours offered for work. Why would that happen? What is the explanation for this? What is now the explanation for that? So the first explanation, again, let me tilt the camera so that we can have it on. So what are the reasons that underlie that? Why would you offer high amount and still people do not? Workers now feel rich enough. Number one is workers now feel rich enough. We say feel rich enough to substitute. We say to substitute. Now feel rich enough to basically substitute. Now feel rich enough to substitute work for leisure. To substitute what you call work for leisure. Now feel rich enough to basically substitute what you call work for leisure. Workers now feel rich enough to substitute work for leisure. Then there are certain people who work. The second explanation, there are certain people. We understand that certain people who work with targets. There are certain people who work with targets. There are certain people who work with targets. There are certain people who work with targets. E.g., accumulating enough business, enough money. E.g., we say accumulating what you call enough, e.g., accumulating what you call enough money to start, enough money. We say to start a business, accumulating enough money to start business, e.g., accumulating what you call enough money to start the business, accumulating enough money to start the business. The moment they achieve the target, the moment we know that they achieve the target. They achieve what you call their target. The moment they achieve what you call the target, they no longer desire to work. They will no longer desire to work. But the moment they achieve the target, they will automatically no longer desire to do what? To work. So then the lastly is the fear of taxes, where we say that the higher the wage, the lastly is that the higher, we say that the higher the wage, we understand that the higher the wage, the higher, we call the higher the taxes. The higher the wage, we understand that the higher the taxes, it attracts. The higher the taxes, it attracts. The higher the wage, the higher the taxes, it attracts. Higher taxation discourages. When some discourages workers from offering, say from offering, higher taxation basically discourage workers from offering what you call higher number of hours for work. Higher number of hours for work. So when you have higher taxes, it definitely will discourage workers from offering higher number of hours for work together. So that is on exception. This question particularly comes. For those who have been revising, you can see this question when it comes 7 marks, 6 marks altogether. To explain that, the backward bending of supply curve set of between work and leisure or regressive supply, you can be asked that. Is that understood? Is this understood? If that is understood, we'll respond with a yes. So I want us to go to the second exceptions to the law of supply. The second exceptions, the law of supply. The second exceptions to the law of supply. The second exception to the law of supply. The second exception, that was the first one. The second exception to the law of supply. The second exception to the law of supply, we say supply of perishable goods. Number 2 now is what we call supply. We call it supply of what we call perishable goods. Supplies of perishable goods. If you're supplying perishable goods, you're willing to even offer them at a lower price so that they don't go bad together. These are goods that do not last. Say these are goods that do not last for long. These are basically goods that do not last for long. These are goods that basically do not last for long. Do not last for long. These are goods that do not last for long. And producers may supply them. And producers may supply them. Producers may supply them. Even, we say, at what we call a lower prices. The producers may supply them even at a lower price to avoid them going to waste. To avoid them, we say to avoid them. Avoid them, we say going to waste. Is that true? Abdul Nasir, Kitawe, and Mary. So you may even sell them at a throwaway price to avoid them going to waste. That is the second exception. Then we have the third exception. We have the third exception where we say that where future expectation of a fall in price. When you talk about the future, the price is likely to dip lower. So we call it future, what we call the future expectation. We call it the future expectation of what we call of a fall in price. The future expectation of a fall in price. The future expectation of a fall in price. Supply tend to be high. Supply tend to be high. We know that even at low price, supply definitely tends to be high even at low price. Supply tends to be high even at low price. If there's expectation of a future fall, if there's what you call expectation of what you call of a fall in price in the future. If there's an expectation of a fall in the price in the future. If there's definitely what's called expectation of a fall in the price in the future. So then number 4 exceptions, we call it where the supply, we say that where the supply of a commodity, where the supply of money is controlled by government, where supply of money is controlled by the government, where the supply of money is basically controlled. So we can have those exceptions, Then supply of artistic goods, supply of artistic supply of what we call artistic goods, supply of what we call artistic goods, supply of what we call artistic goods. Then if government policies to reduce the price of a commodity, if it is the government policy to reduce, we say to reduce the price of a commodity, to reduce the price of what we call of a commodity. If it is the government policy basically to reduce the price of a commodity. If it is the government policy to basically reduce the price of a commodity. Natural calamities such as drought, we have what we call natural calamity. Natural calamity, we say such as drought. Natural calamities such as drought. Natural calamities such as drought, leading to low supply at high price. Leading to what? Leading to low supply at supply at high price. At high price. So when there's a shortage, like calamities, such as drought, they create what we call a shortage. And in those scenarios, when a shortage is basically created, what happens? When a shortage is basically created, we know that the price is high while the supply is low. Understood? All of us, are we in sync? Are we together? Are we together? So then we introduce what we call elasticity. Elasticity of what you call of supply. Elasticity of supply. What is elasticity of supply? When you say elasticity of supply, the measure of responsiveness of quantity supplied to the determinants of supply. So we say this refers to what you call to the measure. This refers to the responsiveness. What you call the responsiveness. This refers to the responsiveness of quantity supplied of what you call quantity supplied, or what you call quantity supplied to the determinants of supply. To the determinants of supply. So it's the measure of quantity, the responsiveness of quantity supplied is what we call the responsiveness of quantity supplied. It is the responsiveness of what we call the quantity supplied. It is the responsiveness of quantity supplied to the determinants of supply, to what we call determinants of supply, to the determinants of supply together. So in this case, now when we talk about elasticity of supply, there's only one determinant, which is price together. There's only one determinant, and that determinant, we basically call it price. Give me a yes if you're together. That determinant, we basically call it price. Is the responsive, refers to the responsiveness of quantity supplied to the determinants of supply. And in this case, we only have price together. So then we have what we call price elasticity of supply. Is there anybody who needs a break? A little bit of break? Is there anybody who needs a break? Is there anybody who needs a break? Is there anybody who needs a break? Ama tuendelee. No, let others get. Quiet means some people need, so you can get a small break. Tuendelee. So we'll finish much earlier. So then, price elasticity of supply. Then now we have what we call price elasticity of supply. I'll get you by 40, I will leave you now. Price elasticity of supply. Now we have what we call price elasticity of supply. On the price elasticity of supply is the responsiveness. We call it responsiveness. responsiveness of what we call quantity supplied, responsiveness of quantity supplied to changes in price, to changes in price. What we call the responsiveness of quantity supplied to what we call to the changes in price. Together, responsiveness of quantity supplied to the changes in price, to the changes in price. How do we get price elasticity of supply? How do we get the price elasticity of supply? How do we get the price elasticity of supply? That is where we have. How do we get price elasticity of supply? So say the price elasticity of supply, price elasticity of what we call of supply is equal to what we call the price elasticity of supply is equal to price elasticity of supply is equal to, we'll say percentage change. Number one is a percentage change in what we call in quantity supplied over what we call percentage change in price, over percentage change in price. How do I get percentage change? What we call the percentage change in quantity supplied. How do we get percentage change in what we call quantity supplied? So that is the final. We have it as final Q minus initial Q over what we call initial or original Q times 100%. That is on percentage change in quantity supplied. Then what we call percentage change in price. What we call the percentage change in price. So percentage change in price is definitely what we call the final. We call it the final price minus what we call initial price. Percentage change in price is the final price minus initial price over what we call the initial price, then times what we call 100%, times 100% together. So this we call it Formula 1. We call it Formula 1. So I proceed to the second formula. I will call it Formula 2. Formula 2. So change in quantity over initial to what we call original quantity divided by change in price over what we call initial to what we call original. So I expound it. So change in Q, we just say over Q, we know that that's original. It's change in P over P. So with this, I can simplify. How do I simplify? I introduce multiplication there. So when I have change in Q over Q, then times that becomes P over change in Q. So what do I get? I will over change in P, sorry. I will get change in Q over change in P times P over Q. Remember, these are originals to what we call initial values. Originals to what we call initial values together. Those are originals to what we call initial values. Originals to what we call initial values together. Originals to what we call initial values. Understood those two formulas. I want to go to illustration, for example. Together. Perfect. The last one, We say change in quantity over original. Original is initial divided by change in price over initial stock original. So change in quantity, we just put it this and this over Q, change in P over that. So I can expand it by saying, how do I know what is change in Q? Change in Q would now be final. We call it final Q minus initial Q. Then when I have change, not percentage now, I'll have final P minus initial P minus the initial P together, minus the initial P. Sawa Abdi Nasir. Abdi Nasir. Abdi Nasir. Is that okay now? Change in. Look up Abdi Nasir. I don't want you to be tired. Change in Q. What does change in Q mean? It is the final Q minus initial Q. Understood? Respond with a yes. Then when I talk about change in price, it is the final price minus initial price. So the formula says, if you get change in Q over this Q, this is original Q over original Q, then you divide by change in price. I don't want people to get tired. That's why I was giving you a break over P. So this is change. We've gotten that. The figures that we are getting down here, Abdi Nasir, those are original or initial values together. So if I have division, I can introduce multiplication. Are we there? If I have division in between, I can introduce multiplication. And if I introduce multiplication, what happens to this? We interchange. So when I have this change in Q over Q, when I introduce multiplication, what happens? Itakuja juu. So we have P over change in P. Understood, Abdi Nasir? Abdi Nasir, Khalif, is that understood? If that is understood, kindly give me yes. So then what is happening here? I can say if I want to bring change together, I'll just say change in Q over change in P. I can interchange because it's multiplication, then times P over Q. Or I can say change in Q over Q times P over change in. What I've done, I've simply brought this one here, this one I've taken there, which is okay because it's multiplication. I can bring these ones together or I can leave it all together. Or this will just be change in Q over Q, which is original times P over change in P. I hope Abdi tuko sawa sasa. Abdi tuko sawa? Abdi, are we together? Okay. But if you're tired, then you let Mwalimu know. Should not just, because I need you. I need you guys. You don't have to stay if you're feeling, you just take Mwalimu a small break. So example 1, illustration 1 or example 1. So we have example 1. And I'm doing example 1. Example 1. So on example 1, we say that when the quantity of a commodity, we just say when, what we call the quantity of a commodity, when the quantity of a commodity is what we call 50 units, when the quantity of a commodity is 50 units, when quantity supplied of a commodity, when the quantity supplied of a commodity is 50 units, the prevailing price, we say the prevailing price The prevailing price is shillings 10. So when the quantity supplied of commodity is 50 units, the prevailing price is 10. However, when the price, we say increases. When the price increases, we say when the price increases to shillings 15, to shillings 15, when the price increases to shillings 15. However, when the price increases to shillings 15, the quantity supplied from a quantity supplied increases to what we call to 60 units. The quantity supplied basically increases to 60 units. So look at what I'm doing. I have Q and I have P. So we have initial and then we have the final value. We have the initial and then the final value. So when quantity is initially 50, the price is 10 together. This is the initial value. When the price is 10, quantity is 15. Let me do one, then you try. I'm only doing this, then I give you one for you. Yes. So then when you increase the price to 15, now quantity becomes 16. I'm going to use the two methods. So I start with Formula 1. Formula 1, we say percentage change in what we call the quantity supplied. Then we have percentage change. We have what we call percentage change in what we call the price. So we have percentage change in quantity supplied, and then we have what we call percentage change in price. So you can get the percentage change in what we call the quantity supplied. Percentage change in the quantity supplied. Percentage change in the quantity supplied. So what is the final quantity? Is 60 minus 50 over the initial, which is 50, times 100. What is the percentage change in quantity supplied? Give me the percentage change in quantity supplied. Give me that. Give me that percentage change. Give me that percentage. Kitawe has already given me that. That is 20. Thank you, 20%. 20%. Then you have percentage change in price. So the percentage change in price, the final price is 15 minus initial, which is 10, over 10 times 100. What is that percentage change? What is that? What is the percentage change in price? Not 15. I don't think so. If that is 15, that should be 50%. So I come to Formula 1. So that is percentage change in quantity over this. So what is price elasticity of supply? Price elasticity of supply, and we call it S1. sorry. What is price elasticity of supply? Price elasticity of supply, 20 divided by 50. 20 divided by 50, we are still strong, very, very strong, I know. So that should be 0.4. So 0.4 shows that it is inelastic, because inelastic, we say inelastic, since it is less than 1, but greater than 0, since it is. So that is the price elasticity of supply. Tuko pamoja. Formula 2. Look at Formula 2. How do you get Formula 2? So say change in Q over change in P times P over Q. And remember, these are original values. Abdul Nasir, are you with me on Formula 2? Are you with me there? Perfect if you're with me. And don't get tired. Good things come to those who are willing to move and move. Don't. So I can get change in Q, which I will say the final Q is 60 minus initial, which gives me 10. Are we together? Then change in P, the final P is 15 minus 10. That gives me 5. That gives me 5. That gives me 5. Together. That gives me 5. Are you able to see those figures that I have there? Are you able to see those figures perfectly well? Are you able to see those figures perfectly well? Kitale, Asante. Mary, are you able to see those figures? So I come back. So change in Q is 10 over change in P is 5 times original P. Original P is 10 over original Q. What is it? It is 50. I simply put here as 50. We should get the same answer. Look at that. What are we getting? This here goes here 2. So that is 20 over 50. So what is ES, which is price elasticity of supply? Are we getting the same? That is 0.4. And we know that it is inelastic since it is greater than 0, but less than 1. I want to give you yours. You do in 2 minutes. Can I give you? You give me a yes if you're there. Perfect. Let me wrap and give you yours. So we say that the next we can talk about, we say that the price of a commodity, we say that the price of what we call of a commodity increases from shillings 10 to shillings 20. So the price of a commodity, this is example 2. Example 2. So the price of a commodity increases from shillings 10 to shillings 20. To shillings 20. From shillings 10 to shillings 20. This leads to an increase. This leads to an increase. This leads to an increase in what we call in quantity supplied. This leads to what we call an increase in quantity supplied. In quantity supplied leads to an increase in quantity supplied from 60, from what we call the 60 units to what we call 80 units. From 60 units to 80 units. So we say required. We have the price elasticity of supply, the price elasticity of supply. The number 2 would say interpret your results. Interpret your results. Your results. So interpret for me your results. So do that for me. Can you do that for me? As the last one. Somebody already has it. Abdul Nasir, that is so nice. Wengine, others? Others? He already has it. What about the others? So what is the change? The change in Q, 80 minus that is 20. Change in price, 20 minus 10, that is 10. times original value. What is the original P? It's 10 over 60. So this cancels with this. So 3 over 6. 3 over 6. Sorry, 2 over 6. That is 2 over 6. 0.33. Great, great, great. Have an amazing students. So this is inelastic because it is less than 1. So I beg to close that because I did not give you a break. So we close there. I hope you've enjoyed the class. I hope, guys, you have enjoyed economics class. Thank you. But again, also, still, we talk to you. Kindly support focus. When you have a brother, Abdul Nasir, where you are, you can talk about focus. You let others know about focus. Thank you, Kitawe. You can, if you have a sister, if you have a colleague, kindly refer them to Focus Online College. Is that true? Is that okay? Kindly do so. Support us. Thank you. I hope you get value for what you come for. That is why we continue to ask you. Will you get value for what you come for? At Focus, we're here to give quality. We're here to serve you. We're here to give you the best. So when you're there, represent us by supporting us. Thank you. God bless you, unless somebody still has something to share with Mwalimu. But I beg to close it there. Have a good evening.